Hello, this is George Bogdanich. I'm sitting here with Judge Rudy Garcia, Rodolfo Rudy Garcia, who has been an appellate judge for 8 years and is running again on March 20th in the Democratic primary. Rudy has had a distinguished career as a circuit court judge and as an appellate judge, former assistant attorney general in the criminal division. Is that correct?
True, yes.
And Rudy, you're from the Little Village neighborhood originally, right?
In fact, I grew up in Maywood. I went to
Okay.
Proviso East High School and then went on to the University of Illinois down in Champaign. And in the interim, my mom moved into the Pilsen neighborhood, and that's where I spent a good deal of my years following my graduation from Proviso East High School in Maywood.
You attended the University of Illinois.
Yes, I did.
What was your undergraduate degree?
I jumped around a little bit, and I eventually ended up with a major in economics, and that provided a good foundation for my eventual career in the law, because it required that I do both social studies and as well as
Business and so on.
mathematical requirements that were involved in the study of economics.
Well, then you went to the University of Chicago.
In the interim, between the U of I and U of C, I spent about 2.5 years working at what was then known as Illinois Bell as a computer programmer. I also spent a year at the part-time evening program for at the University of Chicago Business School. And once I was there, I decided it would be a good idea to get a combined degree, both a JD and an MBA. And so I applied and got accepted at the University of Chicago Law School and began my studies there in the fall of 1978.
So real-world experience is pretty important in a judge's background.
It is, because I think you have to remember your upbringing, and you have to remember what people do every day, and I've tried to keep that foremost in my mind when I eventually took the bench. But long before I took the bench, I was a practicing lawyer, and I dealt with I had a lot of working class clients. In fact, that's where my connection with Little Village comes in, because that's where my law office was, in Little Village.
Okay. The Chicago Bar Association says Judge Garcia is well regarded for his knowledge of civil and criminal law, writing skills, strong work ethic, and diligence. That's a pretty strong review there by the Chicago Bar Association. Tell me, Judge, why should the citizens of Cook County care who's on the appellate court? Why is it important?
It's important. It's a difficult thing to explain too deeply, but this is the comparison I like to make. It's important to have good teachers in every school that teaches our kids, and oftentimes good teachers are unknown. Nobody really knows who they are, but they make a school better. And once the school is better, they make our community better. They preserve housing values, and so judges work pretty much the same way. If you have a good judge on the criminal in the judicial system, it tends to make our judicial system work much better.
Excuse me, we have a caller right now. We'll take that call. Hello?
I'd like to know why judges work such short hours. There's a tremendous backlog in the criminal justice system, in large part because judges seem to take advantage of every loophole you can imagine to basically not work and get paid. And how do we change that? I know you're not a judge yet, or maybe are a judge, but this is horrific in terms of the overall workings of how the court normally works. So how would you approach that? Thank you.
Thank you. In fact, I was a criminal court judge for 7 years, and I spent a lot of time there. And although I think sometimes the perception is that judges don't work hard. I think the reality is that a lot of judges work hard, and we tend to address as many cases that are ready to be heard. We will hear them, but it requires a great deal of effort by different sides to be ready for trial. You need the prosecutor gathering the prosecution witnesses, and then you need the defense gathering the evidence on that side, and then you need the jury who's, if they choose to go with a jury trial, who must be available for your courtroom. So I think when I was there, and I don't know that it's any different now, but when I was there, we worked pretty hard. We certainly worked, and we heard as many cases as were ready to be heard.
You were starting to say why the appellate court is important now. What percentage of law gets settled at the appellate level?
I think that's a great question because, in fact, the focus has been on the Illinois Supreme Court race, which is, of course, very important. But there are 6 spots open on the Illinois Appellate Court, and as has been stated many times, more than 90% of the appeals end at the appellate court. The appellate court decides how a case will eventually end through its decision, and there are so many appeals that are taken, and we decide so many cases that the Supreme Court can't review them all. They review about 6% of the decisions that we make. And so the appellate court is a very, very important court. And in fact, it's like, going back to the comparison I made, it's like the day-to-day teachers versus the principal, who might be seen as the Supreme Court. They set certain tones, but on the day-to-day activity,
the bulk of the work is done by the appellate judges.
Absolutely.
So you have gotten strong endorsements from former members of the Supreme Court, Ben Miller, Mary Ann McMorrow, Tom Fitzgerald.
I've been very fortunate. I think I've worked very hard over the last almost 9 years now. In fact, it'll be 9 years on March 20th. And I hope to be able to continue working hard for all the residents of Cook County. But that'll depend on the votes. That hard work, I think, has resulted in the support that I've received on my lawyers committee, which includes those 3 retired Supreme Court justices that you mentioned, and as well as 11 retired appellate court justices and 7 circuit court judges.
Excuse me, Judge, we have another caller here.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. So often we see judges' names and we're not really quite sure where they stand on a number of topics. And I was just wondering if maybe you could give me an example of an issue you tackled either personally or professionally and how you handled it.
You've had 140 opinions,
Published.
Judge. You can pick one that will be of interest to this gentleman.
There are a variety of issues, and I've addressed I can only address those issues that actually come before me in the cases that I'm signed. And it doesn't necessarily reflect my own personal view. It reflects what the law is, and then we apply the facts to the law. And there is one case that comes to mind that I'd like to give a brief version of, and that is young residents in the Chicago Housing Project were stopped by police after the police received a call, and the officer that initially stopped 3 young men, all under the age of 18. The officer felt threatened and searched the individual and eventually discovered contraband on one of the young individuals. And the question was whether the officer should have searched the individual. The juvenile court judge said yes, and we on the appellate court said he was in the home. He was in a residence. He wasn't doing anything illegal. The officer didn't see him performing any kind of illegal act. And it would be no different than if you were walking down the street. An officer cannot come next to you and begin searching you simply because the officer suspects that you've done something wrong. And so we had to reverse it and send it back to the juvenile court and instruct the judge there to enter an order finding that the arrest itself was illegal.
So there's some difficult decisions because they're based on the law rather than what you might think in that moment is the fair thing to do.
And that's why I really couldn't answer the question any better than how I answered it to the caller, because it really doesn't reflect my own positions or my own feelings. It reflects what the law is, and the law is there to protect the rights of all residents.
Got another one?
Thank you very much for your call.
Thank you.
The Chicago Council of Lawyers uses the phrase "always prepared" in their assessment of you. So tell me, what does it take to prepare for these cases?
Yeah, it takes a great deal of work. It takes a devotion. It takes a commitment to the law. But more than anything, I think, it takes it reflects the fact that I enjoy what I do. I enjoy being on the appellate court. I enjoy writing the decisions. I enjoy reading about the law. I enjoy having lawyers come before me and argue opposing sides, and it falls to me and my colleagues. It's always a 3-judge panel to ask questions and probe each side, and with those questions we eventually reach what we think is the right decision.
So there's 3 of you. It's sometimes 3-0. It's sometimes 2 against 1.
That's correct.
You've been on the dissenting side maybe 15 times. So more often than not, of course, your decisions are... Would you say that most of your decisions are unanimous?
Yes, the majority are, of course.
And
but there are hard cases, and even when you dissent, I've dissented, and I've had colleagues that I very much respect dissent from decisions that I've written, and it's because cases can be difficult to resolve, and the law isn't as clear as sometimes we'd like it to be, and maybe it can never be too clear, and that's why you have sometimes opposing views, and that's why you have dissents on cases.
Are you involved with? You're involved with a fair number of juvenile cases.
They come before us pretty frequently, yes.
Have you ever dealt with peer juries and so on? I understand that's a concept that is sometimes used.
It is, but peer juries are meant to avoid or to keep an individual outside of the criminal justice system because it is peer pressure. It is an assessment by an individual's peers to determine whether the activity that the person was involved in, or at least alleged to be involved in, was appropriate or not. And I think that's a great concept. It is.
It makes people stakeholders in.
It does.
Yeah, and they can be pretty harsh sometimes on their own.
I'm not sure what kind of penalties they can impose, but it certainly is a good idea to get their assessment of what that person is alleged to have done.
Have you seen changes over, from the time you began as a circuit court judge and now through the appellate years? Is there a difference in the kind of cases that you're running into?
That sort of experience is like individual getting older. We look each other. We see each other in the mirror, or we see each of us looks at us in the mirror, and we don't really see much change at the time, but over time it is substantial change. But I don't really detect it as I address the cases that I address at the moment.
Well, your candidacy involved some controversy here because despite the fact that you had broad support from your fellow judges, from the attorneys that dealt with you, the people that essentially knew you the best, in the Democratic primary, the Democratic party boss, as it were, Joe Barrios, decided he wasn't going to slate you, despite you being the only judge in the contest with experience. Can you tell me a little bit about that? I know it showed up in an article in the Sun-Times.
It did, and I feel like it's an issue that won't die, and maybe it shouldn't die. But let me give you a little context. There were 5 spots on the appellate court at the time. There were 5 sitting appellate court judges asking to be slated by the Cook County Democratic Party. We all went before the Cook County Democratic Party, and 4 of the 5 were slated, 2 African Americans and 2 Irish surnamed candidates. And each group within the Democratic Party gets to influence the choice. And so the 5th spot was open up to the so-called Hispanic candidate, and that I thought was going to be me. Turned out not to be me because, as you've indicated, and I hope as a lot of people know, Joe Barrios decided that I hadn't made a sufficient effort to get the support of enough committeemen to support my candidacy.
But that wasn't the real reason, though.
I don't think that was the real reason, but I just as well go on from where we're at now. I will say that I think the slating decision should have been based on who had the experience, the integrity, and the commitment to appellate work, and I think I had that.
Well, you may not want to speak about it, but I should at least let the audience know that the Sun-Times reported that there was a strong feeling that the Democratic Party chairman Joe Barrios was unhappy that you ruled against his daughter on an issue involving whether her petitions were valid, and you did what you thought was right instead of voting the way he was suggesting, or his emissary was suggesting. So I think the public ought to know that, even if you want to drop the issue.
It was one of those cases that was unanimous, and it's one of those cases where we follow the law, and it concerned the state representative, Joe Barrios' daughter, seeking to remove an opponent from the ballot. And we said that the voters had a right to make a choice between the two of them. And eventually the voters did make that choice, and they supported Joe Barrios' daughter. So I didn't see where the problem was.
Yeah.
Because in the end, the result from his perspective was the result he wanted. And yet that resentment.
But your show of independence was not exactly welcomed. Shouldn't independence be a quality that the public looks for in a judge?
I think it's crucial. I think there isn't a more important trait that judges should display than independence, because once you get into a judge who's maybe swayed by one party or another, it's so unpredictable which way that judge will rule, because there may be a lot of different interests that want to sway that judge in one direction or another, and it just isn't the way our system works, and it shouldn't work, and thank goodness it hasn't worked that way for a long, long time.
Loyalty should be to the voters that put you there, not to a political party, right?
As judges like to say, loyalty is to the law,
Right.
and to no one else.
Okay. You must do some of these decisions keep you up night once you've read the law, and everything else you still struggle with it, don't you?
Absolutely. It is not something you can just put down and lay to rest and never think of again. And in fact, there's a lot of thought that goes into before you actually make a decision, because that's where that sort of effort is reflected in the ultimate decision that is issued.
And then how about the relations between the judges? And you have an appellate panel. There are 3 judges. How does that work? Tell me about the collegial relationship. Is there a lot of, is it like 12 angry men, or is it like 3 colleagues just kind of sitting down together?
I think it's more the colleagues, and in fact that's what they described it as. It has to be collegial, it has to be respectful, and disagreements are as to the case, but not as to the person's or the individual judge's view of the law. Disagreements can happen, and they do. And one of the things that I really look to is having the respect to accept disagreement, even if that disagreement is in writing and published to the world.
And do you feel that that experience makes a big difference here in an appellate judge? I mean, you're running against candidates that have not done what you've done for the last 8 years.
And in fact, that's one of the points that I like to bring out, is that of the 5 candidates in my race, I'm the only one with experience on a court of review. And in fact, given my nearly 9 years service on the court, I am now the 8th most senior judge on the appellate court, and there are 24 of us. And it seems like not a good thing to do, to replace such an experienced judge with a judge or even a private lawyer, because there is a private lawyer in the race as well, that has never sat on the appellate court, never worked with the colleagues, never done what appellate judges do day in and day out.
I recall one of the reasons that the legislature had made sure that the pensions for judges were more than adequate, perhaps, in some people's view, was to keep experienced judges within the system.
And I think experience makes a difference. And in fact, what I have stated openly, and to any group that would listen to my campaign talk, is that I am a much better judge in 2012 than I was when I first got on the appellate court in 2003, and the reason is experience. And if I am a better judge now, I can assure you that no judge without any experience will be able to do everything I can do, at least not immediately.
They talk about merit selection of judges as one alternative to the system of elected judges, which is imperfect, as we've already discussed. On the other hand, isn't there something worthwhile about having to go out there and explain to ordinary citizens, what you've done and how you see the courts and why it's important?
That's what my feeling was at the start of this campaign. But the difficulty of reaching out to the voters, and there are over 400,000 voters in Cook County.
There's a whole lot of judges on the ballot, and it's a little bit confusing.
And really, the only race that has gotten any real attention is the Supreme Court race, and rightfully so, because they are the highest court of our state. But as I've stated, the appellate court is a very important court as well, and I'd like to be able to reach out to more people, and I think this is one avenue to do that with. But it hasn't been easy, and as I told another group, I've been elected and I've been appointed, and I think I'd prefer an appointment by the right group.
Well, we've got 1 minute left here, so tell me why you feel that the voters of Cook County should elect you to return to the appellate court.
I think it boils down to experience, independence, and credentials. I've worked very hard to get to where I'm at, and I would like to continue working hard on behalf of the residents of Cook County.
Well, thank you, Judge. It's been interesting, and I am hoping that the voters out there will have listened carefully and will consider very seriously Judge Rodolfo Rudy Garcia.